On a deserted street at night, a man is running for his life. Surprisingly, his pursuer is none other than Supergirl. Finally, she corners him, and he swears that he didn't tell anyone anything. Before she can act, she is attacked by masked soldiers armed with jetpacks and laser guns that can actually hurt her. Supergirl drops a concrete statue on one of them and slams the other two with one of her own billboards displayed on a building. After making short work of the soldiers, she takes off after the man again. Entering a large building, she is attacked by a bizarre-looking robot powered with a kryptonite stone. Somehow, she fights it off with much difficulty and shoves it through a wall. The man, having set the robot on her, retreats into a corner. Supergirl gives a cruel smile, and her eyes glow red, and the whole S.T.A.R. Labs facility enlightens with a reddish blaze and screams of pain. Just then, Supergirl bolts upright in bed with a cry, but looks at the ceiling and sees she has accidentally burned a hole in it with her heat vision. The next day, aboard the Watchtower, Supergirl goes to Jean, the Martian Manhunter, for help. He spends a few minutes in telepathic contact with her and says he frankly doesn't have an answer. Kara says the dreams are like memories and becomes terrified whether she has actually done those things. Jean immediately removes her from active duty from the time being. Disheartened, Supergirl is consoled by Green Arrow, but they are interrupted by the Question, who has a different theory, namely, that it's all connected to a massive worldwide conspiracy. Question reminds her that there's a gap in her memory from when she was treated at S.T.A.R. Labs after being injured in Superman's attack on the Earth. Green Arrow warns Supergirl that the Question is a conspiracy nut, but Supergirl is desperate for answers, so the three start to investigate it together.
This whole trip might just prove the kid shouldn't eat nachos before bed.
Peanut butter sandwiches.
How did you...
Both Arrow and Question accompany Supergirl to S.T.A.R. Labs, where she tells Professor Hamilton about her dream. Sympathetic, Hamilton assures her that she never left the lab. Hamilton shows her a surgical robot, a much smaller version of the one in her dream, that he used to treat her, and theorizes that the dream is a sort of defense mechanism from the trauma of being operated on. As they leave the lab, Arrow appears convinced, but Question is not. The Question is suspicious that the answers came far too easily. They're barely away from the lab when a trio of military helicopters appears and attacks. One drops a robot that attacks Supergirl, while the others disgorge a squad of soldiers that attack Question and Arrow. Somehow, they manage to drive the attackers off by destroying the robot and one of the military choppers. Soon, Supergirl begins to suspect that Question may be right. The robot is a Z-8, which the Justice League buys from the military for training purposes. Question reveals that the officer in charge of the Z-8 project was none other than General Hardcastle, who commanded the military response to Superman's attack. The trio confront Hardcastle, living in forced retirement in the country. Armed and ready for a Kryptonian, Hardcastle appears to be expecting someone to come and attack him, but a lot of what he says seems to confirm Question's theories. For a long time, the military and big business have been experimenting with metahumans, and also that the government has been keeping tabs on the members of the Justice League. Hardcastle himself has been involved with these projects, but whatever is happening now started after he retired. The trio leaves, disappointed. A short time later, someone else enters Hardcastle's home, and she is the spitting image of Supergirl, but with a different costume, shorter hair, and a fuller chest. She reaches the retired general before he could get to the kryptonite gun. Back in the Watchtower, Kara startles awake after falling asleep on a desk. Instinctively, she knows that Hardcastle is dead. Jean calls Question's quarters with a new lead. A news program is reporting the disappearance of a man named Gilbert Hallstrom, whose photograph Jean recognized as the man from Supergirl's dream. Arrow and Supergirl are interested in the company Hallstrom worked for, a genetics firm called Nuvogen, but Question is more interested in the fact that only one news network had the story. They head in different directions. At the local steakhouse, Lasser, the news reporter, is hunted down by his colleague for his secret to the Lightning news source. He then gets into a cab to the hotel, but the driver, who is actually the Question, drives up a dark alley, gasses him, and knocks him out. Meanwhile, Green Arrow dresses up as a stand-in security officer and releases the day shift officer by tricking him.
What happened to Frank?
I heard some contest guy showed up at his door. Free trip to Aruba.
Arrow and Kara enter the building. Unbeknownst to them, someone else is following them. Question kidnaps the reporter Lasser and interrogates him. Lasser says that a girl he's been seeing gave him the story. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a real farmer's daughter type. Arrow and Kara infiltrate Nuvogen and find evidence that they've been experimenting with Kara's DNA. Kara realizes that they've cloned her. She sees file footage of the clone in action during a training exercise that matches her dreams, and she must have some kind of psychic link with the clone. Hearing someone coming, they run into another room and stumble into a holographic chamber simulating Metropolis. Then they are confronted by a Tia and realize it was a trap. She says that as long as Supergirl has a window into her mind, Tia can't operate in secret. Kara fights, but is easily outmatched. Tia is physically older, thus stronger than her, and trained as a much more ruthless fighter. Kara is on the ropes for the most part of the battle, and even Arrow is helpless against Tia as she knocks him down under some rubble. But soon, Kara finds her feet and starts exchanging thundering punches and match Tia with her heavy skills. Unfortunately, Tia manages to throw a whole building onto Kara, which sends her to her knees. Just then, Question appears in the simulated city after entering the building by breaking the glass doors. Question helps up the knocked-out Arrow and quickly reaches the battle site. He reveals that Tia herself has been having sleepless nights. The connection runs both ways, and Tia has been receiving insight of what it's like to have Supergirl's conscience, which is definitely a handicap for an assassin. Tia denies it, and Question insists on proving it by killing him. Tia hesitates, giving Supergirl the chance to counterattack. Elsewhere, a shadowy figure who is watching the fight via camera receives a telephone call and obeys his instructions, triggering the facility's self-destruct. Tia somehow gets caught up in a blast, and Kara shouts to Arrow as it's too late to save her. She then flies Question and Arrow away as the compound explodes. Supergirl reports to Professor Hamilton that they searched the wreckage but never found Tia. Hamilton assures her that S.T.A.R Labs had nothing to do with the clone and signs off. Then, in the company of two military officers, Hamilton attends to a highly disfigured Tia, who is lying on a bed in S.T.A.R Labs, badly injured. Hamilton addresses her by her full name,
Galatea.
As the dust settles, Kara's thoughts drift to her origins. Superman once told her how he found her, a faint distress signal from Argo, where she lay in stasis, Krypton's last remnant. Deep in space, in Krypton's own solar system, Superman flies by in his spaceship. Krypton is now nothing more than an asteroid belt of kryptonite floating in space, but Superman still checks for signs of life. There are none. However, the ship picks up a distress signal from another planet in the system. Feeling hopeful, Superman heads out to answer the call. Superman follows the signal to a frigid world at the edge of the system. Finding that the planet is without any kryptonite radiation, he investigates further. After landing his ship, he finds a lab buried in the ice and snow. Walking inside, he activates the backup energy source and discovers a recorded message from Kala Inze, the planet's former chief physician. The planet is called Argo and was once a thriving civilization. When Krypton exploded, however, Argo was ravaged by incoming shockwaves and torn from its orbit. Eventually, it moved so far from the sun that all inhabitants froze to death. To survive, Kala placed herself and her family in stasis chambers in hope of rescue. After the message finishes, Superman finds the chambers have all been destroyed by weathering, much to his sadness, except for one, holding a teenage girl. Superman finds Kara. Later, back on Earth, the Supergirl, Kara, flies over Kansas reveling in her newfound powers. She flies with a flock of ducks and enjoys her freedom in the nature. Unfortunately for her, Clark grabs her and pulls her down, scolding her for being so reckless. He reminds her that she needs to keep a low profile. She agrees, but complains about the fact that he won't let her fight crime along with him, and he tells her to be patient. Over lunch with the Kents, Jonathan mentions that Intergang is causing trouble in Metropolis again. Kara is immediately interested, but Clark insists that she need not worry. As soon as he leaves, however, she presses Jonathan for more details. In Metropolis, Lois and Jimmy are covering an electronics show, and Lois complains about not getting to cover the Intergang, while Jimmy complains about not having a real reporting break. They're surprised when the tech show is attacked by a couple of teenagers riding on flying discs and wielding beam weapons that shoot fire and ice. Jimmy takes some quick picks as the infiltrating duo tries to steal a heavy wooden box after attacking the civilians. As they're about to leave, Superman arrives and confronts them, but their weapons are strong enough to keep him at bay. After subduing the fire and ice attacks, he manages to capture one of the teenagers, but the other grabs Lois, sticks a flying disc on her, sending Lois shooting into the sky and distracting Superman long enough for their escape. Lois is relieved as she is once again saved by the Man of Steel. Meanwhile, the teenagers return to their gang's hideout at the Hobbs Bay Recreation Center. Granny Goodness greets them, restoring order to the entire Intergang. Clark is busy with work at the Daily Planet when Kara arrives disguised as Clark's cousin, wanting to help him. Clark insists that she stay out of the case and sends her back to his apartment. At the same time, Jimmy complains to Lois that he wants to join in on the Intergang investigation. He insists that he has a lead, a video arcade token that one of the teenagers drops. Lois refuses to let him tag along, and Jimmy decides to check the arcades himself. Kara overhears, and, seeing her chance, decides to join him. The pair eventually finds the right arcade, and discover the same two teenagers that fought Superman now harassing a kid at the arcade. They follow them to Intergang's hideout and sneak in, but get caught by Granny herself. Even though Jimmy claims they only want to join, Granny decides to have them beat up. Kara decides she's waited long enough and tells the thugs that Granny is just using them. Angered, Granny orders Kara killed, but she easily beats the group to the utter surprise of Jimmy and unveils her costumed identity, Supergirl. Granny starts attacking with her own weapon, but after resisting the energy beams, Kara manages to destroy it. Still not ready to call it quits, Granny opens up a boom tube and summons 3 of her female Furies all the way from Apokolips to subdue the new threat, the Supergirl. Together, Lashina, Mad Harriet, and Stampa attack Supergirl, but her fighting prowess is greater than they thought. Kara fights with good resilience after shouting to Jimmy to run and escape, but she finds the electric powers of Lashina the hardest to deal with. Eventually, she manages to defeat Lashina and Mad Harriet. Unfortunately, Stampa manages to force Supergirl out of the building. The gang members run out, leaving Supergirl to fend for herself. Jimmy wants to support Supergirl, and gets the support of another Intergang member with the arm cannons. Meanwhile, Clark and Lois are listening to Dr. Cornell talking about a comet that will be coming within a couple million miles of Earth. Soon after, the ground begins to shake, and Clark notices the fight. He goes to aid Kara in a flash. Even Lois is amazed of where he went suddenly. Superman appears behind the dumbstruck Supergirl, and instantly she feels safe and confident with him, although she makes excuses about the fight. The 3 fighters from Apokolips challenge the Superman, and surprisingly, they carry the upper hand over him almost throughout the battle. While trying to defend Superman, Kara is buried under a fallen building. Superman attempts to save her, but the female Furies take advantage of his distraction and capture him. Superman is taken to Apokolips as they put up a boom tube while Jimmy and Kara watches in horror. Superman is restrained, and the Granny and her 3 Furies greet him as he gains his consciousness back. They put a restraining collar around him and power him down to prepare him to meet the leader. The last 3 remaining, including Jimmy, Kara, and Amy, go back inside. They are confused, not knowing what to do, but just then, Supergirl finds a boom tube generator dropped by Granny and heads off to Apokolips herself. She is appalled by the place, but keeps up her search to find Superman. Twice she is nearly captured, the first by a couple of guards mounted on war dogs, and then by a troop of parademons. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Amy decide to investigate Granny's hideout further and discover a newly built machine, but they have no idea what it actually does. Back in Apokolips, Supergirl runs from the parademons and loses her boom tube generator as she crashes on some metal tubes with a heavy explosion. As she watches the boom tube generator burn in the fire, the parademons start chasing her back. Still unable to evade them, she finally manages to incinerate them, using fire from a fire pit, as she creates a firestorm with her super speed. Shortly after escaping, Supergirl witnesses Superman being dragged away to Darkseid's palace by Granny and her Furies. As she watches in agony, they torture him with his restraining collar. Superman is brought before Darkseid, who explains that since he cannot conquer the Earth, he'll destroy it. Granny was sent there to create a doomsday device, capable of pulling the comet into an impact with Earth. Just then, the doomsday device activates back on Earth, which surprises both Jimmy and Amy. Amy tries to destroy it to make amends for her past mistakes, but she falls unconscious. Angered by her memories of Argo's fate, Supergirl leaps into the fight, but Darkseid quickly disables her with his Omega beams. Fortunately, Superman manages to hit Darkseid and force him to stop, but Granny soon disables him once again with the collar around his neck. The Furies gather around to attack Supergirl, and in her weakened state, she is nearly defeated. But her fighting prowess shows again, however, as she uses Stampa's attack against Mad Harriet and subsequently defeats Stampa. Kara then faces off with Lashina, who nearly defeats her single-handedly, but her lash accidentally wraps around Granny's weapon, disabling them both. Supergirl breaks the handcuffs and frees Superman, and the pair escape into a boom tube generated by Lashina's generator as Darkseid fails to stop them. Returning to Earth, Superman and Supergirl see the Doomsday Magnet, which Amy and Jimmy have tried unsuccessfully to destroy or deactivate. The comet has already been pulled onto its impact course. Supergirl destroys the Doomsday Magnet despite Superman's warnings, and he scolds her, since he could have used it to push the comet away. Now he'll have to do it the hard way. Superman tries his best as he flies into the upper atmosphere to push it away. He manages to do so, but a chunk of it breaks free and heads straight for Metropolis, large enough to cause massive devastation. Realizing it's up to her, Supergirl hurtles at the chunk of comet, destroying it. Superman finishes pushing the comet away and flies down to catch the falling Supergirl, knocked unconscious. On Apokolips, Granny is disappointed, but Darkseid orders the Furies to torture Granny as punishment for her failure. At the Daily Planet, Jimmy proudly admires his front-page story on Supergirl's debut. As his coworkers eagerly crowd around for more details, he points out the window, where Kara flies around Metropolis, proud of her achievement, and confident that Earth has a new heroine. Thank you for watching Second Look. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for more awesome videos. Have a nice day.